Anakin sighed as he was enjoying some real downtime since the war started. He was sitting on the couch in the living room of their apartment reading over a datapad when Pat walked in, having coming home from another meeting with the Senate. "How did it go today?" he asked, standing up. "The same, the Chancellor refuses to find a diplomatic solution to the war, while Dooku is on the run," she replied. She shook her head slowly. "Well, what about this delegation of 2,000? He asked, standing up, surprising his wife. "What?" she asked. He held up the datapad in his hand. "I found this," he told her, placing it back on the table. "Why are you reading over my things?" she demanded. "I thought it was one of mine, to be honest," he replied. The senator let out a sigh. "It's supposed to be a secret," she said softly. "And why are you keeping secrets from me?" he asked. "We just want to be sure no one finds out about this," she replied. She let out a sigh as her husband rested his hands on her disappearing waist. "Pad, you don't want me keeping secrets from you no matter what. I hope you can trust me with situations like this," he said softly. "Of course I trust you," she answered. "So what's the delegation of 2,000? he asked. "We're petitioning for the Chancellor to give up his emergency powers and to find a diplomatic solution to this war," she replied. "Wow, that's incredible," he commented. "Yeah, hopefully it's successful," she answered smiling. Anakin rested his hands on her stomach, feeling a kick. "Well, she's active today," he commented. She answered. Anakin rolled his eyes. "Must we get in this debate every day?" he asked curiously. "Yes, because I'm right," she replied, making him chuckle. "I insist that I'm right," he told her. "Anakin, you didn't cheat, did you?" she asked, her hands on her hips. "No, whatever do you mean, my love?" He chuckled lightly. Had raised her eyebrow. "Anakin, did you search in the Force to find out what we're having?" she asked. "No, I really didn't do that," he replied, making her smile a little. Chuckling, he kissed her forehead. "I wouldn't ruin the surprise," he assured her, smiling. He moved his hands over her stomach again, making her smile. "I'm still saying it's a girl," he added. Shaking her head slowly, Pat laughed softly before he let her go. "I saw Bastila earlier today," she commented as she removed her cloak from her shoulders. "Well, I wasn't here?" he asked curiously as he followed her to their bedroom. "Yes, she wanted to ask me something," she replied as she hung her cloak up. Anakin leaned against the doorframe. "Is everything alright?" he asked, concerned for another one of his close friends. "She's a little confused," she replied as she walked out onto the terrace and sat down. She smiled gently as her husband sat down beside her. What would Bastila be confused about?" he asked curiously. "Obi-Wan," she replied, making him chuckle. "Confused about what she feels about him or confused about what he feels for her?" he asked. "The latter," she replied. Sitting back, Anakin rested his hand on her stomach, feeling another kick. "Well, look at the last time Obi-Wan ever had feelings for someone," he pointed out. "That's what I told her. I think Obi-Wan cares for her as much as she cares for him, if not more," she replied. "I believe that too. I also believe she's a little apprehensive to her own feelings than she'll admit, because her last lover abandoned her, or so that's how she feels," he replied. Padme held her husband's hand. "I don't know where I would be without you," he said softly. "You'll never have to think about it," she answered. Smiling, he gripped her hand a little more when the door opened and Han walked in. "Well, there's my co-pilot," he commented standing up. "Hi, Anakin," Padme, Han greeted. "How are your lessons?" Padme asked smiling. "They same old," he replied, plopping down on the sofa. Anakin stared at the boy curiously. "You're back kind of late," he commented. "Yeah, well, had a few things to do," Han replied. Anakin saw the bag sitting by Han's feet. Before the boy could react, the bag flew into his hands, and he opened it to find a large stash of food. "Han, what are you doing?" "We have plenty of food here," he commented with a sigh. "I didn't steal that," Han answered standing up. "No?" Anakin answered. He walked over to the table and dumped everything out to find magazines and games sitting out on the table. "I know Padme and I didn't get these things for you, unless this is all on the little allowance Padme gave you yesterday," Anakin commented. "You're not my dad, so why do you care?" Han demanded as he got up and grabbed his things off the table. "No, but I'm all you have," Anakin answered. "If I didn't care I wouldn't have protected you from that Slimo on Tatooine." "I wish you did leave me on that dust bowl," Han muttered. "I don't believe you really think that," Anakin answered. Han turned around glaring at him. "Leave me alone. You're not my dad, so stop trying to act like you are." He snapped before he just practically threw the stuff back on the table, storming to his room. Shaking his head slowly, Anakin stared at all the stolen merchandise on the table. He looked over to see his wife standing there. "Well, that went well," he muttered. "He's 10 and probably has been alone for a long time, trying to survive on his own. Put yourself in his shoes. You weren't separated from your mom when you were in slavery," she pointed out softly, wrapping her arms around his waist. Anakin rested his hands over hers. "What am I supposed to let him off?" he asked. "No, but be patient with him," she replied. "I do hope our kids won't be as stubborn," he muttered with a sigh. Padme laughed a little. "Just don't give up, that's the last thing this boy wants and needs," she told him softly. Sighing, Anakin walked out of his wife's embrace and went to talk to Han. Making his way into the boy's room, he found Han just lying back on the bed with a blaster in his hand. "Now where did you get that?" Anakin asked. "I found it," Han replied, putting the weapon down next to him. Anakin shook his head slowly. "Oh boy Han, I can see that you're not adjusting well to the new changes in your life," he commented. "Don't use your hooky GD talk on me," Han answered, "not as good as having a good blaster next to you. And you know how to use that?" Anakin asked. "Sure do," Han replied. Anakin shook his head slowly, before grabbing the weapon. "Hey!" Han exclaimed, jumping up. "This is far from a toy, Han," he commented. "Tell me something I don't know, Captain Obvious," Han answered as he tried to yank the blaster from his hand. Anakin kept a grip on it, making sure to flip the safety on, so the kid didn't accidentally shoot him with it. "Give it back," Han exclaimed. "I'll give it back when you're older and actually know how to shoot with it," Anakin answered as he stuck the blaster into his utility belt. "Stop talking to me like you're my dad," Han snapped. "Well, I'm the only father figure you have in your life, and really I think you need one. You have a lot of potential, Han. I can see that you could be something great if you would just learn how to direct that anger and frustration into something useful," Anakin answered. Han let out a frustrated sigh. "Han, I'm sorry that you were separated from your parents. That is something I'm trying to prevent it from happening to other families," he informed the boy. "Don't give me pity, Anakin." "I don't want it," the boy answered with a slight glare. Anakin shook his head slowly. "Well, I could use your help. I'd like to have my co-pilot to be ready to go for Corellia for the Corellian Security Force Academy," he suggested with a grin. Han looked at him surprised. "What?" he asked. "I think this little trip will help you focus more on a brighter future instead of one of crime," Anakin replied. The boy stared with wide eyes. "Wow," he trailed off when he got up. "First things first before I go to talk to the person who is head of the academy," he stated. "What?" Han asked. Anakin grinned as he grabbed the boy by his arm and grabbed his refilled backpack. "Return all this," he told him, handing him the bag. Padme was standing there with a slight smile on her face, as she watched the two of them get ready to leave. "We won't be long," Anakin assured his wife. "Take your time," she answered as she watched the two of them leave. Smiling a little, the senator of Naboo sat down on the couch and began reading over her datapad again. The next day, Padme was sitting in Organa's office during one of the secret meetings. She kept her hands in her lap when she felt a kick. Anakin, dressed in his justice disguise, stood behind his wife with a hand resting on her shoulder. Now that he has control of the Jedi Council, the Chancellor has appointed governors to oversee all star systems in the Republic, Organa explained. "When did this happen?" Fang Zar asked. "That decree was posted this morning," Organa replied. "Do you think he'll dismantle the Senate?" Padme asked. Mon Mothma looked toward her. "Why bother? As a practical matter, the Senate no longer exists," she told her friend. Anakin could feel his wife's disappointment in the senator's words. "The Constitution is in shreds." Amendment after amendment, Gideon Danu put in. "We cannot let 1,000 years of democracy disappear without a fight," Organa insisted. "What are you suggesting?" Tertani laughed. "Suggesting? I apologize, I don't mean to sound like a separatist," Organa told them. Anakin subtly ran his thumb over his wife's shoulder, trying to find a nonverbal way to comfort her without revealing who he was. "We are not separatists trying to leave the Republic. We are loyalists trying to preserve democracy in the Republic," Mon Mothma reassured them. "I can't believe it has come to this. Chancellor Palpatine is one of my oldest advisors. He served as my ambassador when I was queen," Padme answered, horrified that one of her most trusted friends could be betraying them all. "Senator, I fear you underestimate the amount of corruption that has taken hold in the Senate," Danu told her. Padme lowered her head sadly. "The Chancellor has played the senators well. They know where the power lies and will do whatever it takes to share in it," Mothma put in. "And we cannot continue debating about this any longer," Organa stated as he stood up. He went to walk away but then stopped and turned around. "We have decided to do what we can to stop it. Senator Mon Mothma and I are putting together an organization," he started. "Say no more, Senator, I understand. At this point some things are better left unsaid," Padme answered. "Agreed," Organa told her, "and so we will not discuss this with anyone without everyone in this group agreeing. That means those closest to you. Even family," Mon Mothma told them. Mon Mothma looked toward Padme. "No one can be told," she added. Showing reluctance, Padme couldn't help but feel grateful that Anakin was able to talk her into letting him come to this secret meeting. "And what of you, Justice? Can you be trusted? You have shown no alliance to neither the Separatists or the Republic," Danu pointed out to the vigilante. "I am loyal to Naboo and Senator Amidala. My loyalty has always lied with her for the last 3 years," Anakin replied. "You seem to be declaring your own war without having to worry about problems to the Republic that you have declared war on," Zar commented. "Senator, my war lies with slavery and those who support it. I do not trust the Republic, even more now that Chancellor Palpatine has been manipulating the system into his own twisted world," he replied. Padme cleared her throat. "What Justice is trying to say that he wouldn't betray our trust? As long as his loyalty lies with me, our secrets are safe," she put in, not wanting to start a fresh debate. Anakin gave her shoulder a squeeze before crossing his arms over his chest. Until then, this meeting is adjourned, Organa stated, leaving no room for debate. As he was escorting her back to the speeder, Anakin looked down at his quiet wife. Hadn't talked to me, he said softly. I just can't believe that over 1,000 years of peace and freedom is deteriorating right in front of us, she murmured softly. Anakin suddenly pulled her aside and hugged her close to him. What kind of galaxy are we bringing our baby into? She asked. He hugged her tighter, letting out a sigh. Our baby will be safe, so will you, he whispered. I'll die first before I let anything happen to either of you. Padme hugged him back, resting her head on his shoulder with her eyes closed. Come on, let's go home, he whispered. Nodding, she held onto his hand as they went back home for the evening. Padme smiled as she made sure Han had all of his things. Alright, are you sure you have everything? She asked. Yes ma'am, he replied with a half grin. Anakin chuckled lightly as he rested his hand on the boy's shoulder. Make sure you contact us when you reach Corellia, he instructed. Yep, got it, Han replied with a grin. Padme smiled as she hugged the boy. Being outside in his civilian disguise, Anakin was wearing black boots, brown pants, and a tank tunic. He had his arms crossed over his chest with a slight grin when Han stood in front of him. Thank you Anakin, for everything, he told him. Anakin smiled as he held his hand out to shake the boys. Contact us if you need anything at all, Anakin answered. I will, Han reassured him. The young couple watched as the boy climbed onto the transport that was heading to Corellia. Anakin smiled as he held his wife's hand as they went back home. Padme was getting ready for a Senate meeting when she saw her husband standing out on the terrace meditating. She smiled a little as she went to leave, deciding to not bother him. Don't go, he told her. I didn't want to disturb you, she said softly. Your presence is soothing, he answered. She smiled a little, resting her hand on her stomach. As much as I would love to stay here, I have a meeting to go to, she told him. I have a feeling you're not going to like what you're going to hear there, he answered. Turning around to look at her, he saw her stare at him quizzically. The Chancellor is taking over everything. I don't like it, he stated suspiciously. I just don't understand how Palpatine could become so untrustworthy. He was senator for me when I was queen, she said softly. I know, but dark energy surrounds him. It's very unsettling, he murmured, rubbing her arms. Padme rested her hands on his arms. What can this mean? She asked. I'm not sure, just wait here. I'll get in my armor and come with you, he replied. Ani, I don't need you protecting me all the time, she insisted. Yes, I do, it's dangerous right now. The Chancellor is becoming more suspicious about everything, he answered. About what? She asked softly. Everybody, he replied. Leaning forward, he pressed a kiss to her lips before going to put on his armor. When they arrived at the Senate building, Anakin looked around. The air in the building was different, everything seemed more tensed, darker even. Ani, she said quietly so only he could hear. It's alright, he assured her softly. He kept his hand on her shoulder as they went into their usual seating area. Letting out a deep breath, he saw the Chancellor there waiting. Their eyes met again, but Palpatine's eyes diverted from his. Padme, something is going on, he whispered. What do you mean? She asked. He stood up suddenly. Get ready to run, he told her. What? She asked. Dear senators, my once noble colleagues. You have betrayed me, Palpatine said suddenly. There was an eerie silence in the room. The delegation of 2,000 has failed. I have done what is right with the Senate. To preserve peace, I would hope there would be senators that shall join me, Palpatine informed the senators. Anakin saw guards standing by the doorway. Fortunately for those few, I have seen my allies. Those who are my enemies shall be arrested immediately, Palpatine added with a sneer. Padme let out a gasp when several clones began walking in. Get back. Anakin snapped, standing in front of her. When the clones opened fire on him, Anakin pulled out his double lightsaber and began blocking blaster shots aimed for him. Tiffo, get the senator out of here, he told his wife's guard. Tiffo grabbed onto Padme's arm as they escaped. Looking toward the clones that began surrounding him, Anakin grabbed one clone that tried to grab him from behind and threw him to the floor. Seeing that he was surrounded, the young man grinned behind his mask as he swung his lightsaber around before disconnecting the sides, making them two separate gold lightsabers. When the clones went to attack him, he jumped over their heads and severed two of the clones' arms as he did so. They fell to the ground, screaming in pain. Looking over his shoulder, he saw Organa being arrested and ran over to get him. Holding his weapons above his head, he swung them both from across, and the arresting clones' heads rolled across the floor. Tiffo, keep your ship on the ground, I'm sending Senator Organa, he stated. Very Justice, we don't have time, Tiffo answered. Just keep your shields up and doors closed until the senators I can get released get out there, Anakin replied. Anakin called a blaster to him, tossing it to the Senator of Alderaan. I hope you know how to use one, he commented. Certainly, Organa replied before firing at a clone that tried to sneak up behind the vigilante. Thank you, Anakin told him. Likewise, the Senator answered before they started running through the halls. Running through the halls, they were able to save several of the senators that were being arrested. Go. Go. Anakin shouted when he saw a clone holding up a flamethrower. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw the senators running toward the landing platform. Get to the ship. Anakin shouted to them before backflipping to get away from the large wall of fire that was fired at him. Rolling back to his feet, the young man held his hand up, force pushing the clone backwards. Padme was sitting on the ship when the rest of the senators climbed aboard. "Where's Justice?" she asked. "He's still in there," Organa replied. Her eyes were white in horror when she saw a large cloud of fire come from the Senate building. "No," she shouted in horror. "Milady, we have to go," Tifo insisted. "No, we're not going without him," Padme answered. Back inside the building, Anakin was about to get ready to head out when he suddenly felt a cloud of darkness around him. Ducking out of the way suddenly, a red blade connected to the wall beside him. Well, seems that Justice is more than he seems," a voice sneered behind him. Looking over his shoulder, Anakin saw a cloaked figure standing behind him. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Not important. What is important that this is you are about to meet your doom," the person said with a sneer as they held up their lightsaber. Anakin stood up slowly, swinging his lightsabers around once when Dooku came out from behind the wall. "As you can see, you are outnumbered, Justice," he informed him. "Actually," Dooku the figure started to say. Before he could react, Anakin watched with wide eyes as the red blade pierced through Dooku's stomach. "There can only be one heir to the Empire," the figure hissed. Dooku's body fell to the floor lifeless, and the new Sith apprentice turned, removing their hood. Anakin felt his heart speed up. This was a young girl. A girl that could be no more than 17 years old. She had dark blonde hair tied in a braid and wound into a bun in the middle of her head, and her eyes were sickeningly yellow. She had on black boots, black pants, a black tunic, a black vest, and her black cloak. "Who are you?" Anakin demanded again. The woman grinned a little as they began circling each other. "I guess it should only be fair if you knew the person who was about to kill you." "I am Darth Demonia," she informed her opponent. "I have heard so much about you, Justice. It'll be a great honor to kill you." "I don't think so," Anakin answered. Demonia charged at Anakin at full force, swinging her lightsaber around. Holding his lightsabers up in an axe above his head, he blocked her attack aimed at his head, and then blocked the attack aimed for his middle. Reaching up with his foot, he kicked the girl, and made her stumble a little. She was quick to regain her balance and let out a small shout as she charged at her opponent. Moving just as quick, he jumped over her head, blocking an attack to his head as he did so. Grabbing a hold of her arm, he threw her to the floor, and tried to use his lightsaber to stab through her chest when she reached up with her foot and kicked him in the face. Moving back, he jumped again when she tried to cut his legs off with her weapon. Tifo, get them out of here," he ordered. "What about you?" Tifo asked. "Don't worry about me, just get them out." "Now Tifo, that's an order," Anakin demanded. Anakin continued blocking the attacks. "Protect Padme, that's your mission, protect her," he added. On the ship, Padme had heard everything and her eyes widened at what she had heard. "Understood," Tifo answered before cutting the connection. "No? We can't leave him here," she insisted. "Milady, Justice is intelligent and strong, he'll make it back," Tifo assured her. He looked at her as she tried to grab the controls. "You know he wants not only you safe but your baby to be safe too," he whispered so only she could hear. Before she could object, she felt a hard kick to her stomach from her unborn child, forcing her to nod in agreement. "Alright," she answered. As Tifo flew off the platform, Padme was looking out the window with tears welling up in her eyes. Back inside the Senate building, Anakin was in a deadlock with the Sith apprentice in front of him. "You are such a fool, protecting you silly senator," she sneered. "You won't be touching her or any of the others anytime soon," he answered with a hiss. Before he could do anything, his head began to throb. Holding his head, he cried out a little as he dropped to one knee. One lightsaber fell to the floor while he tried to rid himself of the horrific pain. His eyes widened in horror when a vision appeared in his mind. Fire, he saw fire. Jedi Padawans, Jedi Knights, and even Masters all being slaughtered. It was obvious there weren't enough there to defend them against the army of clones attacking the temple. He saw children, infants even being mercilessly murdered. He could hear their frightened younglings' screams echoing in his head. "Help us. Someone help us." A child's scream was heard. Demonia laughed evilly at her opponent. "This is the end of Justice," she sneered. She raised her lightsaber above her head to bring it down on Justice, when a force push suddenly knocked her off her feet. Bastila stood in front of her former apprentice with her lightsaber raised. "Far from it," she hissed. She looked towards Anakin. "Are you alright?" she asked. "The temple, we have to go to the temple," he answered as she helped him stand up. "A massacre, there's going to be a massacre there." Bastila looked toward Demonia to see her obviously answering a call to her own comlink. "Go, Anakin, go," she urged to him as they started running. Running out of the Senate building, they jumped to their speeders. "We're not going to get younglings out of there in just these speeders," Anakin told her over the comlink. "No, I know, I have it taken care of. Just get there as fast as you can, Anakin," Bastila answered. "Got it," he replied as he sped off as fast as his speeder could take him. Arriving at the temple, Anakin jumped out of his speeder as several clones came charging at him. Raising his reconnected lightsaber, he easily defeated them as he ran into the temple, heading towards the area he knew the clones go first, to kill off younglings that were too young to even understand what was happening, let alone defend themselves against an opponent. Arriving at her second home, Padme saw R2 and 3PO already there. 3PO, have you heard from Justice? She asked. We have heard from Miss Selena. She said they were on their way to the GD temple, the golden droid informed his mistress. What? The senator exclaimed in disbelief. Hurrying over to the terrace, she let out a gasp when she saw that the GD temple was practically engulfed in flames. We haven't received any transmissions since then, Melody, 3PO added regrettably. Feeling as though her whole world was crumbling, Padme was unable to keep it together anymore. Wrapping her arm over her growing stomach, she let out a sob as she pressed her knuckles against her forehead as she broke down. Anakin ran up the stairs to the youngling's wing when he saw clones heading to the room. Monsters. They're only children, he hissed angrily. Jumping up and reaching out with the force, Anakin landed in front of the clones. Sorry gentlemen, but I'm afraid you're going the wrong way, he seethed. While the clones ambushed the young man, Anakin made sure to keep them from getting into the room. Throwing a few clones back, Anakin raised his hand in the air, and a force storm appeared. Force lightning came down and electrocuted many of the clones there. You have been listening to me, Bastila commented as she ran up the stairs. We need to get in there, he answered as he opened the door. Looking outside, they saw hundreds of younglings crying and cowering away. What frightened the children more was the armor-clad man in the doorway. Anakin Bastila started. These kids are not going to come to me if I'm dressed looking like a monster, he replied, removing his helmet. As soon as his mask was removed, a child ran over to him terrified. It's alright, young ones, he assured them as he lifted the child up. He looked toward a window. Cover your eyes, children. He called out as he held his hand up. The older children ducked behind anything they could find when the window shattered from the force push. As the window shattered, Anakin turned his head, using his cloak to cover his head, as well as the child in his arms. I hope you have a plan, Anakin told Bastila as she pulled her mask off. I do, she answered when a familiar ship appeared in front of the temple and the door opened. Well, seems are in a bit of a bind here, Jango commented. A bit, Anakin agreed with a half grin. Can your ship fit all these children? I have plenty of room, Jango replied. Anakin handed the boy in his arms to Jango's arms, before he and Bastila went to get the rest of the children onto the ship. Just when they thought they were done, a little girl looked up. Rin's not here, she exclaimed. Rin? He asked. Some of the younglings must have ran away when they saw the clones, Bastila answered. Anakin looked around when he grabbed his mask. Justice, where are you going? Jango called. I'm not leaving them behind, he replied as he grabbed his lightsaber. Jango jumped off the platform. Well, you won't be doing this alone. Boba, watch the kids, he ordered his son before the three of them ran out of the room. Running through the halls, Anakin came upon the council chamber and opened the door. He saw at least a dozen more younglings coming out from behind their hiding places. Justice, there's too many of them, what are we going to do? The boy asked fearfully. Before Anakin could answer the child, he heard blaster fire. Get down, he ordered, whipping out his lightsaber. As the clones stormed into the room, the vigilante began defending the younglings. Blast it, Anakin snapped. Reaching out to the force, the clone began grabbing at his throat, gasping for air when he was lifted up off the floor. Swinging his arm to the side, the clone flew and knocked the other clones to the floor. Run, children, go, he ordered as the children ran out of the room terrified. While they ran, Anakin was blocking blow after blow aimed at him as well as them. The clones in front of him dropped to the floor dead with Jango behind them, with his blaster raised. Nice shot for a bounty hunter, he commented. Nice saber skills for a vigilante, Jango answered. They took off down the hall back toward the ship where Bastila was leading the children inside. Just as they climbed up on the ramp and got into the ship, the door was closing right behind them. Jango hurried over to the pilot's chair, sitting down. Where are we going? Jango asked. I have to pick up my wife, Anakin replied. Jango glanced at him. The senator of Naboo? He asked. Yes, Anakin replied, letting out a sigh. I can't say I'm surprised the way you were protecting her on Geonosis, he commented. I need to get her into hiding as well. I don't want the Emperor getting his filthy hands on her, Anakin insisted. Bastila let out a deep breath as she held her comlink. Come in, Obi-Wan, do you read? She asked when her former apprentice looked over at her. I'm sure Obi-Wan's fine, Anakin reassured her, resting his hand on her shoulder. Letting out a sigh, she nodded her head slowly. I'm sure he is, she agreed. Anakin let out a sigh. Hopefully with that force storm a few GD Knights and Masters were saved, he murmured. We couldn't save them all, Bastila answered. I know, but I just feel like we should have done more, he insisted as he sat down. Bastila rested her hand on his arm when Anakin walked over to Jango and Boba. I need to send a transmission to all living GD, he informed them firmly. It's right here, send out whatever you need, Jango answered, patting the comm station beside him. Anakin nodded as he began sending a message. Attention all GD, this is Justice. I am informing you all that the temple has been destroyed. I repeat, the temple has been destroyed. All living GD please regroup on Xun where you will be protected and safe. The younglings are safe, I repeat the younglings are safe, and I will bring them with me when I meet with you, he explained into the comm. Anakin patted Jango's shoulder before he sat down again. Back in the second apartment, Padme had changed out of her senatorial gown and into a light blue nightgown. She was standing outside, waiting for any transmission whatsoever from her husband. She winced a little from the slight pain in her stomach from the baby's constant kicking. Hearing a ship approach, she stood up and looked outside to see an unfamiliar ship land outside. She reached into the desk beside her and pulled out her blaster. Just as she was about to demand Jude she let out a gasp. "Ani," she exclaimed quietly and put her blaster back. Hurrying over, she threw her arms around his neck. "Are you and the baby alright?" he asked. "We're fine, but what about you?" she asked, checking to see if he was injured. "I'm alright," he assured her, hugging her gently. Pulling back, he placed his hands on the sides of her face. "We need to get you out of here," he told her. "What about everyone else?" she asked, looking at the senators. "Senator Organa," he started. "Don't worry, Justice. We have it all planned out. We'll be able to get Palpatine to believe we have abandoned the delegation," Organa replied. "What about Senator Amidala?" Bastila asked. Anakin hugged his wife to him. "She's always been an enemy. It was him all along that has been behind her assassination attempts," he replied. "How do you know this?" Mon Mothma asked. "I was able to read his head, briefly," he replied. "If he's a Sith Lord, that could only mean Bastila trailed off." Anakin kept his hand on her stomach. "Could he sense the baby?" she asked. "Most likely," Bastila replied quietly. "We need to get her into hiding, now. If he sensed the baby, then it's only a matter of time for him to send his new apprentice to track the Force signature here," he explained. Pad looked at Anakin, letting out a shaky breath. "Be safe, my friends," Anakin told them. "You too as well," Organa answered as they boarded the ship. Anakin looked at Pad before looking at Jango. "I need you to get her and the younglings to Paulus Massa. They'll be safe there and they can be taken care of medically," he told his friend. "Right, what about you?" Jango asked. "I have a couple of friends to help," Anakin replied as he went to get off the ship. Pad grabbed onto his arm. "I'll be fine, I just want to be sure you and our baby will be alright," he told her. He removed his mask, resting his forehead against hers, while his hand rested on the side of her neck. "I'll meet you there as soon as I can," he told her softly. "Alright," she answered. "I love you." Anakin pressed a kiss to her lips. "I love you," he answered before he pulled on his helmet and exited the ship. Once the ship was gone, Anakin looked toward R2. "R2, where's my ship?" he asked the astrodroid. "Beep, beep, beep," R2 replied before leading Anakin to his fighter. "Master Justice, what should I do, sir?" 3PO asked. "Go with Senator Organa right now, 3PO. I'll be by to retrieve you once I know when we'll be returning home," Anakin replied. Anakin went down the hall to the hangar of the apartment to see his second Z-95 headhunter, which he called Angel 2 sitting there. "Ready, R2?" he asked when the droid was secured into its place on the wing. "Bleep, bleep, whirl." R2 replied excitedly. "We're going to go find Obi-Wan, R2, he told his excited droid, chuckling lightly. Having the fighter lift off, he flew off into the distance to search for Obi-Wan. Reaching out into the Force, Anakin was able to find his friend's Force signature. "Dantooine, of course," he murmured before flying towards that planet. Landing on the planet, he looked toward R2. "R2, stay with the ship," he ordered. "Bleep, chirp," R2 answered. Pulling on his hood, Anakin withdrew his lightsaber before running into the forest to search for his friend. Obi-Wan was in the midst of battling a group of clones that were attacking him. "Blastus just keeps getting better and better," he muttered to himself when a gold blade pierced through the back of a clone. "Need some help, my friend?" Anakin asked with a grin. "Couldn't have come at a better time," Obi-Wan replied as the two of them began battling the clones surrounding them. Once the clones around them had been defeated, Anakin looked toward his friend. "Where's your fighter?" he asked. "Destroyed. I was shot down when I was trying to leave the planet," Obi-Wan replied. "That thing I built an extra place into my fighter just in case," Anakin commented as they ran back towards his fighter. "What of the Council and the rest of the Jedi?" Obi-Wan asked. "I'm not sure. I sent out my message to all living Jedi to meet on Xun. I have yet to go there," the younger man replied. Climbing into the fighter, Anakin lifted the ship off. "I have a feeling your Jedi master, Yoda, will be trying to fight Palpatine," he commented. "Most likely," Obi-Wan replied. Anakin let out a deep breath. "We still have so much work to do before I can be reunited with Padme," he commented. "Bastila, is she alright?" Obi-Wan asked. Anakin glanced over his shoulder. "She's fine, worried about you," he replied. Obi-Wan couldn't help but feel relieved that Bastila was alright. Smiling a little, Anakin let out a deep breath as he flew back toward Coruscant. When they arrived back at Coruscant, it was another day and night was beginning to fall. "Obi-Wan, do you have Yoda's tracking beacon?" he asked. "It's right here," Obi-Wan replied, holding up his small tracker that showed Yoda's blinking beacon. Letting out a deep breath, they climbed out of the fighter and into the speeder that was waiting. "R2, get the cruiser ready," he instructed. "Whirl, beep," R2 answered before they flew off. With all the adrenaline pumping through their veins, it hadn't become noticeable that they hadn't slept in over 24 hours since Order 66. Flying as fast as he could through Coruscant traffic, Anakin let out a deep breath. "Where is he, Obi-Wan?" he asked. "At the Senate building," Obi-Wan replied. Flying through the air, they were able to lock onto Yoda's position, and the Jedi Master let himself fall into Anakin's speeder. Are you alright, Master Yoda? Obi-Wan asked. Yes, failed I have. Control the new Emperor has over the Republic, Yoda explained. We'll gain control of the Republic again, Yoda. Anakin answered as he flew back towards where his cruiser was waiting to take them to Palas Masa. Yoda looked over at the young man curiously. Curious it is that a lightsaber you carry, he commented. It's a long story, Yoda. Anakin replied behind his mask. Trained you have been in the Jedi arts, young Skywalker, Yoda commented suddenly. Anakin glanced at him. How did you know it was me? He asked curiously. Justice appears on Coruscant when you appear, Yoda replied simply. Anakin let out a sigh. Fight like a Jedi you did against the bounty hunter, he added, just like justice. That doesn't mean I fight like a Jedi, Anakin answered. Shaking his head slowly, the young man flew off toward the waiting ship. The two Jedi masters and pseudo-Jedi boarded the ship and flew off toward Palas Masa. Padme and Bastila were still on Palas Masa, waiting for Obi-Wan and Anakin. I'm sure they're fine, Padme commented softly, trying to reassure her friend as well as herself. I'm sure they are, they're strong, both of them, Bastila answered, letting out a deep breath. Sighing a little, Padme rested her hands over her stomach when she felt one of the babies kick her. A small smile appeared on her face. While the droid was running tests on her, she was informed that there were two babies instead of one like she and Anakin were expecting. Looking over, she saw Bastila standing by the window watching out for them. Suddenly, she saw her eyes light up. They're here, Bastila murmured anxiously, hurrying out of the room. Padme got up and followed after her. Walking outside, Bastila practically ran over, throwing her arms around Obi-Wan once she was close enough. Obi-Wan hugged her back, letting out a deep breath as he slowly lifted her up off the ground. You're alright, she murmured, gripping him tighter. I'm alright, thanks to Anakin I'm just fine, he assured her. Yoda walked by, glancing at the two of them, and shook his head slowly when Padme ran over to Anakin, hugging him tight. Anakin hugged her back, resting his forehead against the side of her head. Are you alright? He asked. I'm alright, she assured him. She rested her forehead against his neck. The baby? He asked. They're fine, she replied. Anakin pulled back, staring at her curiously. They? He asked. Padme smiled at him. There's two of them, she said softly. Anakin's eyes widened, but then a smile appeared on his face. That's wonderful, Padme. That's wonderful, he said, getting excited, hugging her tight again. Padme hugged him back, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. Kissing the side of her head, he hugged her closer. The medical droids are saying I should stay here. With it being twins, there's a chance I could be giving birth soon, she explained. Then we'll be staying here until our babies are born. Then we'll go to Tatooine, he said softly. Kissing her once more, they went inside. While his wife was resting, Anakin was in the conference room with Bail, Yoda, Bastila, and Obi-Wan. Bastila informed me that you wanted to talk to me about something, Anakin commented, now back in his civilian garb. Two Force-sensitive children, dangerous it is, Yoda answered. Speaking their father has a high midichlorian count, it shouldn't be surprising, Anakin told him. Find them the Emperor will, protect them we must, the Jedi Master answered. Feeling that the Jedi Master was hinting something, Anakin crossed his arms over his chest. What are you suggesting? He asked. Take one Senator Organa should, Yoda replied. Lost your mind you have, Anakin mocked with a glare. Yoda stared at the young man. Dangerous it is for them to be together, he insisted. They are my children, Yoda. I will do what is right for them. Not what you think is right for them. Since you know nothing of family, you are not the authority on how to conduct matters pertaining to such, Anakin answered. Bail shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearing his throat. How could you agree to this? Anakin demanded. I didn't know about this, Anakin, I swear, the senator answered. My wife and I are looking to adopt a child, not take one from their living parents. Anakin looked at the senator. I think I know who you could bring home to your wife, he told the senator before leaving the room. A little while later, he returned with what looked like a newborn. From what I have seen, I think your personality and hers would merge perfectly. From what I've seen, she's only a few days old, a new youngling to the Jedi Order, he explained. Bail stood up and Anakin placed the infant into his arms. From what it said on her crib, her name is Nayla, he told his friend. She's beautiful, Bail commented as he looked at the infant that was falling back to sleep. I'm glad I could help. She needs a home, what better place than with a couple who would do anything to have a child? Anakin asked, smiling. Bail smiled as he looked at the baby in his arms. Thank you, he told Anakin before sitting back down. Dangerous this is. Find them the Emperor will. Do this you must, Yoda answered. Excuse me, I don't believe you were in the room when my wife and I made the twins, Anakin told the Jedi Master irritably. Obi-Wan cleared his throat to choke back a laugh. Bastila smacked his arm gently. These are my children, mine, not yours. I will do what I see fit for their safety. They are coming back to Tatooine with me, both of them, he told Yoda. Not safe, Yoda answered. It is safe because I am their father, Anakin said angrily. Just then a medical droid came in. Mr. Skywalker, it appears your wife is in labor, the droid informed. How long ago did she go into labor? Anakin asked. 5 minutes ago, the droid replied. Glancing at the Jedi Master, he shook his head slowly. You're not taking my children, he told Yoda before leaving. Arriving into the medical room, he saw Padme breathing through a contraction. "I'm here, Angel," he said softly, kissing her forehead. "It's not so bad yet," she replied softly. Smiling, he rested his forehead against the top of her head, looking at the medical screen to see their twins' heartbeats. "Look at how strong their heartbeats are," he whispered in awe. Padme looked with a smile before whimpering as another contraction hit. A few hours passed and Padme's labor was progressing quite rapidly. Crying out a little, she grabbed her husband's arm. "It hurts, ow, ow, ow," she whimpered. "I know it hurts, I know, I'm sorry," he answered, resting his forehead against her temple. He would want nothing more than to take her pain away. Padme gasped for air while closing her eyes tight. "Ani, I think it's time, I really do," she replied. "I thought the labor could take hours," he asked. "They're anxious," she replied. Seeing that his wife was serious, Anakin got up and went to find the medical droid. When the droid entered the room, the young man stood by his wife's side, holding her hand as she started pushing. They could hear the droid coaching her in its language. She cried out in pain as another contraction hit her, forcing her to push once more, and felt her child leave her body. "Boydo," the droid informed over the screaming infant's wails. But Padme whispered through her tears. Walking over, Anakin took his screaming son into his arms with grateful tears filling his eyes. "Hi Luke, hi," he whispered softly, holding his tiny hand. The newborn quit screaming from hearing his father's calming voice and feeling his mother's gentle touch. "Oh Luke," Padme whispered. Anakin smiled as he cradled his son in his arms, while Padme started pushing again. A few minutes later, another baby's wail filled the room. "Bastila Oga," the droid informed. Unable to hold back his tears anymore, the new father let out a small sob. "It's a girl, Padme, a little girl," he told her. Padme sat up with her husband's help as the droid floated over, placing the screaming, wriggling girl into her arms. "Little Leia," Anakin whispered with a smile. "They're so beautiful," Padme whispered. He kissed her temple with a smile. "I love you," he told her, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you," she answered. Leaning forward, he pressed a kiss to her lips. He sat down beside her while they both fawned and coddled their newborn children. After a few minutes, they switched and Anakin was now cradling his daughter in his arms. "My little girl," he whispered. Leia, unlike her twin who was asleep, was staring up at him with curious big brown eyes. "We've been waiting for you," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her soft forehead. A little while later, Padme was moved into a more private room with the twins. Except, Anakin was now pacing the halls with Luke in his arms. Luke was sleeping soundly in the soft blankets he was wrapped in, his tiny hand covering his face. "Well, I was wondering if we would see you down here," Bastila said smiling as she walked over. Anakin chuckled lightly, carefully hugging Bastila with one arm. "Let's see," the woman insisted, watching as her former apprentice pulled back a fold to reveal the infant in his arms. "How precious, which one is this?" she asked. "Luke," he replied. "Congratulations, Anakin," Obi-Wan told him smiling as he looked at the infant. "Thank you. Leia's in with Padme right now, but I'll probably bring her out." "I'd invite you in, but you know," Anakin started. "We understand just fine, Anakin," Bastila assured him. Anakin smiled softly at his former master, before looking back at the room where his wife and daughter were probably sleeping. "Is Yoda still insisting that we separate them?" he asked, looking at Obi-Wan. "Oh yes, especially since he sensed the birth. He did try to come into the room to see the birth," Obi-Wan replied. "They stopped him?" Anakin asked, chuckling at the idea of the Jedi Master being forbidden to enter the room. "Senator Organa," he stood in front of the room and refused to step out of the way. With the youngling in his arms, Yoda wasn't going to try anything, Bastila replied. Anakin chuckled lightly while looking at his sleeping son. "I'm taking my wife and children to Tatooine with me," he informed his friends. "We're going with you," Bastila answered when she put her arm around Obi-Wan's back. Anakin smiled at his two friends. "I knew there was something going on between you two," he commented. Luke let out a noise as if on cue, making the three adults laugh. "Just rest right now, Anakin. We will worry about traveling to Tatooine when you're fully rested." "It's been 72 hours and no offense, my friend, but you look awful," Bastila commented. Nodding, the new father smiled a little before he went back into the private room. When he tried to place his son into his crib, he only started to fuss. Smiling a little, he held his son's tiny hand before lying down beside his sleeping wife and daughter. Kissing all three of them, he rested his forehead against Padme's. "I love you," he whispered. Smiling in her sleep, she let out a sigh. "I love you," she said sleepily. Smiling, Anakin looked at his wife and newborn children before he fell asleep. Anakin smiled as he placed Leia into her crib by the bed. "Yeah, now you're all ready to go," he said softly, stroking her cheek gently. Leia just let out a little noise, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching in her sleep. Smiling softly, the new father stroked the top of her head gently before looking at Luke to see him wide awake. "What are you wanting attention now?" he cooed, lifting his son up and pressing a kiss to the tip of his nose. Luke let out a yawn as a response, making his father smile and hold him in the crook of his arm. "Ani, please be careful with their heads, they're only a day old," Padme said tiredly. "Don't worry, Angel," he answered smiling. Anakin smiled as he held his son's tiny hand between his thumb and index finger. He couldn't help but feel proud of the fact he was a father to 2 beautiful children. Sighing, he carefully placed the newborn back into his crib before leaving them alone to rest. Even though they had to return to Tatooine, Anakin had one more mission to complete. Walking to the cockpit of the ship, he saw Bastila there, getting the ship ready for takeoff. "Ready?" she asked. "Yep," he replied as he sat down. Obi-Wan sat down with Yoda sitting across from him. There was so much hostility in the air, Anakin could practically taste it. "Dangerous idea this is," Yoda commented. "Yoda, I am adamant on this subject, they are my children. As their father and Padme as their mother, we have a right to decide what is best for them," Anakin answered. "Clouded your mind is with attachment," Yoda told him. Anakin pursed his lips, letting out a deep breath. "Not all Force-sensitive people who love Yoda go bad. Sometimes it is love that keeps one from going to the dark side," Bastila stated seriously. "Attachment leads to fear, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering," Yoda insisted. "From my time, Yoda, attachment wasn't so bad," Bastila answered. Anakin looked toward Bastila in disbelief. "Bastila," he started to say. "He knows who I am, Anakin," she answered, removing her mask for the first time in front of the Jedi Master. "Don't you?" Yoda stared at the woman in front of him. "Interesting it is that you are around for so long." "Thousands of years it has been," he commented. "Yes, because I have dabbled into the dark side of the Force to give me immortality," she replied as she stood up. Anakin closed his eyes, letting out a sigh. He knew Bastila's whole story, she was never afraid of telling him anything. "Use the dark side you have, still a Sith you are for doing so," Yoda answered. "No, I have only done so in order to continue with the mission Revan gave me thousands of years ago. He gave each of us a mission before he departed on his final mission, a mission that claimed his life. My mission was to find the Chosen One and to look out for him," she explained. Obi-Wan stared at Bastila curiously, since this was the first time he was hearing her story. "So, I used the dark side of the Force to use the powers to give me immortal life, so that way I could continue with my mission. I gave birth to a child along the way, a daughter of my own. She didn't want to learn the ways of the Force, and I wasn't going to force her into it. She grew up, she grew old, and I had to watch as my own child she trailed off, the pain of losing her daughter gripping her heart." Standing up from his seat, Obi-Wan made his way over to Bastila, resting his hand on her shoulder. Silence passed over the ship, and Anakin lowered his head a little, letting out a sad sigh. "I couldn't let the loss of my daughter keep me away from the mission I had promised her father, that I would find the Chosen One, and keep him from falling into the wrong hands," she started again. "How old are you if you don't mind me asking?" Bale asked curiously. Bastila laughed lightly at the senator's curiosity. "My dear senator, I am over 3,900 years old," she replied. Bale's eyes widened at her admission. Clearing her throat, she went back to her story. "Over the years, I searched the galaxy to find any sort of clue to the Chosen One's coming. I meditated constantly in my search. It was tedious and lonely work, but I had a mission and I never backed out of a mission no matter what. Then, about 22 years ago, I was on the planet Xun, increasing my fighting capability when I felt a large shift in the Force," she explained. Yoda let out a sigh, rubbing his chin as he listened to her. "I am surprised none of the other Jedi have felt the coming of the Chosen One. The Force shifted when he was born. Now that I knew that the Chosen One had finally arrived, I went in search for him and I found him. I found him born into slavery and being cared for by a wonderful young woman. I kept an eye on him from afar, making sure no slave traders could capture me and sell me. Being alive for thousands of years you learn a few tricks," she commented, chuckling lightly. Anakin chuckled lightly, sitting further back in his seat. "I've known you had of the Chosen One's coming, why wait to train?" Yoda asked. "The question is why didn't you believe Qui-Gon when he brought this boy before you?" Bastila asked. "Too attached this boy was," Yoda insisted. "So you keep saying," Bastila answered. Obi-Wan moved his thumb in circles over Bastila's shoulder. "I couldn't take him into my protection. I had a vision of how he would find his way to me, so I waited. I waited until Obi-Wan knew of my location, which he somehow had found while he was on Tatooine," Bastila commented, looking at her secret lover with a raised eyebrow. "I sensed another Force-sensitive person on the planet while I was meditating. I had gone to find the source," he answered, thinking of the memory as if it were yesterday. Obi-Wan was traveling through the desert, just unable to shake off the Force-sensitive feeling he kept getting. As he was walking his way through, he suddenly found himself caught in a sandstorm. "Last, this is what I get for getting curious." The young Padawan scolded himself as he pulled his hood down over his head in an attempt to cover himself. Before he could try to find shelter, he felt someone grab onto his arm. "Come this way. You're going to get killed out here," a voice called to him. The person pulled him through the desert before they came to a hovel. Pulling him inside, his rescuer threw off their hood. "You Jedi Padawans, I swear," she muttered. Obi-Wan removed his hood, surprised. "You know what I am?" he asked. "Of course I know what you are," she replied, turning around. Obi-Wan's eyes widened when the woman stand in front of him. "I never understood why the Jedi had these ridiculous things added to their Padans though," she commented as she flicked at his Padawan braid. "Who are you?" Obi-Wan asked. Question is, who are you and what in the name of the Force were you doing out in a sandstorm? She replied. Obi-Wan Kenobi, he answered. The woman raised her eyebrow, nodding her head slowly. Ah yes, she said softly. She nodded her head slowly. Of course, she murmured as she pulled off her cloak. That doesn't answer my question, he told her. She raised her head after hanging her cloak up. Bastila Shan, she answered. Bastila smiled, patting his hand gently. I knew Jedi would be too frightened of a child to let him into your order, which is disheartening for me because in my day, Jedi weren't afraid of children, she commented. When Yoda went to open his mouth, Bastila raised her hand to stop him. Master Yoda, please forgive me, but if I hear you say anything about the boy's attachment one more time you will become attached to the wall, she told him. Anakin choked back a chuckle, disguising it with a cough. So you had to wait for Anakin to come to you? They laughed. Yes, because it could be disastrous to change the course of history, Bastila replied. She let out a sad sigh as Obi-Wan rubbed her arms gently. Obi-Wan contacted me a few days later, telling me of your council's decision. So, I went and found the boy and trained him, she finished her story. Bastila stared at the Jedi Master in front of her. Reckless the boy is, Yoda objected. Reckless? I do not believe so. He was taught the true Jedi way, not the limited and short-sighted teachings that led to the fall of your Jedi, she answered. The room was completely silent, the air around them was tense. Yes, in my time Revan did bring down the Jedi before followed by Darth Traya, but they were brought down by their own kind. You were also out of touch with the Force, you let a politician bring down the Jedi. If it weren't for Anakin and me, your younglings would be slaughtered, all of them, she told him coolly. Bastila Obi-Wan started. No, he's going to sit there and tell me that my training Anakin made him reckless. If my former apprentice was so reckless, how was it that he was able to save thousands of lives? She asked. She looked back at Yoda. He was able to save thousands, but still have a wife and children, that you conveniently want to try to steal away from him. That is not the Jedi way, she told him. Personal feelings you have for the boy, Yoda answered. I practically helped raise him, so yes, I have personal feelings for him. He's like the son I never had and I love him as such, Bastila told him. Seeing the Jedi Master stare at her, she shook her head slowly. Here's another thing, Yoda. Master Sunrider would be so disappointed in what has happened to the Jedi Order. She would be appalled at how things turned out, she added. Yoda's ears perked up at the name. She was fully grown with a child when the Jedi Order took her in. You say it's a myth, but it is far from a myth, she pointed out. Know this how? Yoda asked. I was once her apprentice, she taught me many things, she answered. Yoda stared at her in disbelief. Believe you I do not, he told her. Why? Because it's true that Master Sunrider loved. That I loved. I had a child and so did Sunrider. Bastila asked. Yoda was silent. Do you despise the fact that I taught Anakin that it was alright to love his mother? That it was alright to marry Padme and to be a father to his children? She asked. The Jedi Master was once again silent. Why can't Anakin be the chosen one, a husband, and a father all at once? She asked. Distracted he will be, Yoda answered. What if his children and his wife are all that he needs to defeat the Sith? Bastila asked. Bastila stared at him. You know what I believe. I believe you are very angry at the fact that I had done something you didn't even think of. That Anakin is successful because of what I taught him, things that your Jedi Order could never teach him, she commented. Anakin stood up after putting the ship into autopilot. We'll be at Sun in a few short hours, he informed everyone in the room. Bastila nodded her head slowly, patting his shoulder. I'm going to check on Padme and the twins, he added before leaving the room. Watching her former apprentice leave, she shook her head slowly with a sigh. Anakin is a good man, Yoda. He would have been a remarkable Jedi if he were born in my time, she stated. Obi-Wan grinned, because he knew it was true. Anakin walked into the bedroom to find Padme fast asleep with one arm tucked under her face, and her other arm was tucked under the pillow, while the blankets were down around her waist. Covering her back up, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, stroking her hair gently with a small smile. He looked back at his children to see them fast asleep still. Lifting Leia carefully up into his arms, he smiled a little as his daughters shifted in his arms. Reaching up with one hand, he stroked her soft cheek gently. Deciding to leave the room to leave his son and wife alone to sleep, he walked out of the room and through the halls of his ship. As he walked more toward the back of the ship, he saw Obi-Wan walking over. Is she still arguing with Yoda? He asked. No, she's made her point, Obi-Wan replied. Anakin chuckled lightly as he carefully bounced his daughter in his arms lightly. Get some rest, Anakin, we'll let you know when we're close to Sun, Obi-Wan told him. Anakin nodded his head slowly before going back to his room. After placing Leia into her crib again, he removed his boots and cloak before lying down beside Padme. Turning around in her sleep, she rested her head on her husband's chest with a sigh. When Anakin fell asleep though, everything Yoda and Bastila talked about dealing with him started flooding his mind. He saw himself sitting on the couch in his and Padme's apartment with a datapad in his hand. What confused him was the fact he was wearing Jedi robes, and he had a glove on his right hand. He saw Padme walking in, looking like she had come back from a meeting. Obi-Wan was here, wasn't he? He heard himself question her, almost sounding irritated. He came by this morning, Padme answered, rubbing his back briefly before heading to their bedroom. What did he want? Anakin asked, following her. He's worried about you. He says you've been under a lot of stress, she replied. It was then Anakin noticed that neither him or Padme weren't wearing their wedding rings, but it was obvious Padme was pregnant with the twins. It was clear to him that he was a Jedi, but still with Padme. I feel lost, he told Padme. Lost? What do you mean? She asked. Obi-Wan and the Council don't trust me, he replied. They trust you with their lives, Padme insisted. Anakin was standing by the window, shaking his head slowly. Something's happening. I'm not the Jedi I should be. I want more and I know I shouldn't, Anakin told her. Standing there, watching this dream play out, he couldn't help but sense confusion and some darkness within himself. You expect too much of yourself, Padme said softly, touching his arm. I found a way to save you, he said suddenly. Save me? She asked. From my nightmares, he replied. Padme placed her hands on his chest. Is that what's bothering you? She asked. I won't lose you, Padme, he insisted. I'm not going to die in childbirth, Ani, I promise you, she answered. No, I promise you, he told her vehemently. Anakin woke up with a slight gasp, jumping a little from the dream he was having. He felt Padme shift in her sleep before she woke up. Ani, what is it? She asked. Nothing, I'm alright. Just go back to sleep, he answered, rubbing her back. Nodding her head slowly, he felt her relax and go back to sleep. Sighing, he stared up at the ceiling. Seeing what he saw play out in his dream was a vision from the Force showing him of what he would have turned out to be if he were a Jedi. He seemed obsessive, scared, and that made him a target of manipulation. Lifting his hand, he saw his normal, ungloved hand instead of the one he saw in his vision. Sitting up slowly, he rubbed his eyes and gave up on sleep. He heard his comlink go off, telling him that they were coming up on Xun. Padme, I have to go, he whispered softly. Alright, she answered. Love you, he said softly. Love you, she answered. He kissed her briefly before leaving the room. When they landed on Xun, Anakin walked out wearing his armor again, his mask under his arm. Why wear the mask if your identity is basically revealed? They laughed. Not all Jedi know who I am, and I would like to keep it that way, Anakin answered before looking at Yoda. Secret it will remain, Yoda told him. Anakin sighed as he pulled his mask on and walked off the ship. Standing outside, he saw all the Jedi gathered together. They were talking amongst themselves until Yoda got their attention. I know we're all exhausted and in shock over the fact that the Republic betrayed everyone. That the new Emperor played you all for fools, Anakin started his speech as all the Jedi looked up. Why do you care? You have made it really clear that you have no loyalty to anyone, a Jedi commented. If I didn't care, I wouldn't have rescued the younglings from your temple, he replied. Where are the younglings? Another Jedi asked. Some have been placed in the care of people I can trust, where they can be protected from the Emperor's watchful eye. The rest, I believe there are enough Jedi here to take them, he replied. The remaining Jedi looked at each other, surprised that Justice was willing to help the Jedi. As of now, you must all go into hiding. The galaxy is too dangerous for Jedi to be seen. Even if you go by different aliases, it'll protect you. There will be a time when Jedi are needed again, but now is not the time with the Emperor having a stronghold on everything, Anakin explained. When will we know we can come out of hiding? Another Jedi asked. Know we will through the Force. A sign it will give us, Yoda answered. Anakin smiled a little behind his mask. Until then we must all go into hiding until the time is right, he informed. When Anakin got back on the ship so Yoda could discuss everything with his fellow Jedi, Obi-Wan walked over to the young man as he sat down. Are you alright? He asked. Yes, just exhausted from the last few days, he replied. Obi-Wan patted his shoulder lightly. Well, when you go to Tatooine, Bastila and I are going with you, he informed his friend as he sat down. Anakin looked over at his friend with a half grin. I just had a feeling you two were more than friends, just had a feeling, the younger man commented. Chuckling lightly, Obi-Wan let out a sigh. I'm not like you, Anakin, I don't let my feelings do the talking, he answered. No, you follow your Jedi code ways, Anakin commented, which is dead now, so I guess you have no code to be loyal to. Laughing again, Obi-Wan shook his head slowly. No, I think it's a good idea for you two to be on Tatooine with us. You like family to Padme and I, we would want you to be able to see the twins, Anakin commented. Obi-Wan nodded with a smile. After their meeting with the Jedi on Xun, everyone went their separate ways. Last Anakin knew, Yoda was heading to Dagobah to hide. When he had set the ship's course to Tatooine, Anakin leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, hoping to catch a little more shut-eye than he did before. Tilting his head back, he propped his feet up as he began falling asleep. Once more, his head was filled with another vision of the Force. Anakin looked around to see that he was in the middle of a massive battle. He saw bodies strewn all around him. Looking closer, he saw that they were Jedi. Except these Jedi were different. Their robes weren't like the ones Obi-Wan wore. They were more like how Bastila described. He suddenly saw Bastila and himself running, looking around with their lightsabers drawn. Where are they? Bastila asked. I have no idea, he replied as he continued looking around for their unseen attackers. They looked over as the ship landed. Get on the ship, he told her. What do you mean get on the ship? Bastila demanded. Just get on the ship. Take Leia and get on the ship, he answered. It was then the real Anakin saw a young child on Bastila's hip. Go Bastila, just go, I'll be right behind you I promise, he heard himself insist. Just then, several masked attackers came out of their hiding places, attacking them. Bastila go, he shouted to her. Bastila ran on the ship. He watched as Bastila placed her 3-year-old daughter on the ramp, before she turned to go back. Turning back to his Jedi Knight self, he saw he become overwhelmed with attackers when one struck him with a force pike. No. He heard Bastila shout as he fell to his knees. Mama. The little girl shouted to her mother. Anakin watched in sheer horror as another now killer struck the dying Jedi Knight with a final blow, making him fall to the ground completely limp. Knight Shan. We must go. He heard a voice insisted. Knight Chancellor is still out there. Bastila insists. He's gone. If you go back out there his death would be in vain. Now get back, a voice snapped. Anakin watched as Bastila lifted her daughter up into her arms and climbed the ship with the ramp closing behind her. Anakin woke up with a gasp, his hair stuck to his forehead from the sweat. Are you alright? Bastila asked. Looking over, he saw his former master standing in the doorway. Yes, just a weird dream, he answered, sitting up. You know what I told you about dreams, Anakin, she pointed out, sitting down. He gave her a half grin. Bastila, who was Chancellor? He asked. He saw her eyes grow wide at the name. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long time, she commented, sitting back in her seat. Was he me? Back in your time? He asked. Bastila stared at him for a second. You saw something, didn't you? She asked. I might have, he replied. Tell me, she urged lightly. Sighing, he rubbed the back of his neck. There was this large field. Jedi were dead all around and there was you and I swear it was me out on the field, he answered. She frowned deeply at his explanation, letting out a sigh. Anakin Chancellor was a close friend of mine, a very close friend. After Revan disappeared without a trace, that Anakin became like my partner in all my missions. We were an unstoppable team. He even tried to help me on my mission, even though he had no idea what it was, she explained. Anakin listened to her story. There was also a little girl in there, your daughter. Leia? He asked. Bastila sighed sadly. You dreamt of the day Anakin Chancellor died to protect mine and my daughter's lives, she said softly. He nodded his head slowly. My daughter was devastated, completely devastated. Chancellor was the closest thing she had to a father and he died right in front of her. She was 3, but she saw more death than a child her age should have, she explained. So you too, Anakin started. No, we were only friends. Close friends, I never forgot him or his sacrifice, or should I say yours, she answered. Anakin stared at her for a second. Anakin, I believe from his sacrifice, a sacrifice that cost him his life, but saved hundreds of others, the Force chose him to be reincarnated as the chosen one. I believe Anakin Chancellor came back as you, she explained. Do you truly believe Anakin Chancellor and I are the same man? Anakin asked. You act just like him, but happier than him, she replied. What do you mean? He asked. Bastila sighed as she rested her hands on the arms of the chair she was on. Chancellor always spoke about how he never felt truly complete, she replied. Anakin stared at her curiously. You truly are living the life Chancellor spoke about. He talked about the mother he never knew, and the family he always wanted. He always to be surrounded with friends and allies, but he just couldn't seem to trust anyone, she explained. She smiled softly at her former apprentice. I had a feeling you were Chancellor, but what proof did I have? Now I know because of the dream you had. Only Chancellor himself would have known what that scene looked like, she explained. Anakin was silent. It would explain why you named your daughter that name. Chancellor adored my daughter as if she were his own. He was there for a lot of her big milestones, her first steps, her first words. He was the one who saw her smile for the first time, she commented. He saw a lot of things that a parent would want to witness, he answered. He did, and Leia just adored him just as much if not more. She had a son of her own when she grew up, that she named after him, in dedication to the Jedi Knight who dedicated his life to make sure my mother and I were safe, she quoted. Anakin smiled a little. You're an incredible fighter, Anakin. You would have been an amazing Jedi if everything fell into place back then. Padme, your mother, all of the friends you have made throughout your life. If they all existed in that time, you would have been one incredible Jedi Knight, maybe Grand Master, she explained. Wow, Anakin murmured, wondering of how it would have been if he had become a Grand Master. Bastila laughed softly, patting his arm gently. You are a great fighter, Anakin, she stated with a small smile. I wouldn't have been one without your help, he answered. Before his former master could say anything, they could hear the twins crying. And now switching roles to being a father, he commented, standing back up. Bastila watched him go and let out a sigh when Obi-Wan walked over, resting his hand on her shoulder. Smiling, she reached up and placed her hand over his. Walking into the room, he saw Padme sitting up already cradling one twin in her arms. Which one do you have? He asked. Leia, she replied. Alright, I'll take Luke then, he murmured, lifting his fussy son into his arms. We'll be arriving at Tatooine soon. Alright, she answered, yawning. You alright? He asked as he sat beside her after grabbing the already made bottle R2 was holding out to him. Smiling, he held the bottle up to his fussy son, who immediately latched on and began sucking down his dinner. My mother will be thrilled when she sees them, he commented. I'm sure, she answered, smiling as she held Leia's hand between her thumb and index finger. Sighing, Anakin sat back against the wall while cradling Luke in his arms. You alright? Have you slept? She asked. Yeah, I've slept. Just strange dreams, he replied. Did you talk to Bastila? She asked. Yeah, I have, she has given me some interesting insight on it. Nothing for you to worry about, Angel, he assured her, smiling softly. Padme smiled as she carefully moved beside her husband, resting her head on his shoulder. Are you ready for the next part of our lives? She asked. With you there, I'm ready for anything, he answered. Kissing her forehead softly, the young couple smiled before they both looked at the children in their arms. They're out hope for a better future, she said softly. I'll do whatever I can to give them a better future. They'll grow to be wonderful people, both of them, he answered. I can believe it, she murmured, stroking Leia's dark curls. Anakin smiled as they both finished feeding their twins and tried to burp them. Seeing his children, he couldn't help but smile. This was what he had wanted since he first met Padme. He had done nothing but daydream about what their children would look like. Seeing the twins, how they looked past his daydreams. They were beautiful, perfect. He felt like the luckiest man in the universe, and just for a moment, he forgot that the Empire was now taking over the universe, and they were going into hiding. Padme looked up at her husband and pressed a kiss to his jaw. I love you, she said softly. Smiling, he pressed a kiss to her lips. I love you, he answered. While they both held a twin, they cuddled up together and looked at their children with fond, loving smiles.